So here with Dan Reynolds, and Dan had a fantastic question the other day on Facebook. And again, a lot of times you get these Facebook messages, and the questions are like one sentence, missing some of the information. And you had the most well-structured, well-thought-out links. You'd formatted the text, everything. It was fantastic, and it honestly kind of blew my mind a little bit. So you'd actually tagged me on there. You put up the bat signal, and so people do that. I come running, I guess. Put a little response there, but wanted us to get together, record a video because it was such an interesting issue. So
Thank you.
To start with, how did you what prompted this to come up as an issue for you?
Yeah, anybody who's worked with me, if you care to look me up on Oakmar or anything like that, you see, I work primarily with buyers, and so like knowing what's changing in the buyer's market and how to navigate that is obviously really important for me. And then I had saw that the new changes from OREC had just come out to all our standard forms. And so I went poking around on the OREC change guide and saw this one and said, hey, wait a second, that seems kind of weird. And so then I wrote my wall of text and tagged you in it, and here we are.
So what was the gist of the issue that you identified?
So for me, reading the change guide, there was a change to our contingency form. Was condition not under contract form is I think the formal name for it. And it used to be that the kickout was you had 24 hours from when the seller issued their notice for a kickout. And the new contract form says that it's 24 hours, no less than 24 hours, unless that 24-hour deadline happens to fall on a business day, a holiday. I'm sorry, not business day. If it happens to fall on a holiday, Saturday or Sunday. And so for me, like on the buyer's side of things, like that just complicates the issue more than I care to have it complicated. I recognize the commission can, do what they like to do, but for me, I think that puts contingencies at a big disadvantage because if a seller takes a contingency and then they get a better offer later on, all of a sudden they're stuck to that. And the commission cited a specific paragraph of law at the same time, and that's what really threw me for a loop.
Right.
So that's why I wrote this and said, hold on a second.
Well, like you made the point, I think it was you that made it or somebody did in that thread, that if you're looking at like Thanksgiving, for example, if you want to submit your kickout clause on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, they would have really until the following Monday, so they've got almost, half a week or more to be able to do that. And it was kind of an interesting issue because they just did it in that one where there are other deadlines in the contract, right? Maybe that could be submitting your TRR. It could be, any number of things. And the only one that does that on this day or the next business day is earnest money deposit.
Right.
It's the only one in the contract that says that. And so it kind of threw me for a loop too when I saw, to be in compliance with that one statute that they cited.
Yep.
It's like, what is going on here? So that sent me down a little bit of a rabbit trail because I didn't, moment of honesty, I didn't know about this, right? That's always terrifying, right? When it's like, what do I not know?
Right.
Yeah. So when I looked at it, right, that statute is just a general statute that says we recognize these as holidays in the state of Oklahoma. Like that's what it is. It's not in the real estate code. It's not in the real estate commission statutes. Yeah. It's just in like the definition statutes, which is super weird that this would be relevant to a contract, because then there's that little paragraph in there that says any, act where you're required to perform an act or permitted to perform an act, and it starts out with any act. If it has to be done on or can be done on a holiday or weekend, the deadline for it is a holiday or weekend, then you have until the next business day.
Right.
And it doesn't say anything about contracts, right? Or real estate or anything. It's just like this general...
Very vague.
Very vague. Very vague. And of course, the holiday definition includes Saturdays and Sundays.
And Black Friday.
It did say Black Friday? That's funny. I didn't even look at that.
Black Friday, yeah.
That's funny. So there you go, right? And so when I looked at that, I'm like, I think anybody that reads it would not think that
Yeah.
to be
Agree.
on a real estate contract, right? It's like, well, we've got a term in our real estate contract. Our real estate contract even says time is of the essence, of course, which is like means that the deadlines are hard deadlines.
Yeah.
And now we have this. So I thought it was confusing. So I kept digging. And I started looking at the citations from that statute and came across an old case from 1979
Okay.
that was specifically dealing with a real estate contract. And it's funny when you think about the history of things, like you ever think about like how you got to what you're doing, like
Sure.
all these like weird things that happened like 10 years ago that now you're doing this. I think this is one of those situations because in this case, they had scheduled the closing, right? And it says you got to close on or before X date.
Right.
They put Sunday, October 1st, in this case, it was a Sunday
Okay.
in 1978 or 9. And that was the day they put for closing. And of course, like, nobody does that today. Nobody's
Right.
going to put a weekend as a closing date.
Right.
And had they not done that in this contract, like, this never would have come across anybody's radar, I don't think. But they put Sunday. And so the buyer was like, well, since it says Sunday, because of this statute, we actually get to close on Monday.
Right.
And the seller was like, no, 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 no. It says on or before October 1st. Once you hit October 2nd, you're in breach of contract.
Right.
And our contract says time is of the essence.
Right.
And this goes all the way to the state Supreme Court. Right? Like, who would have thought,
Wow.
right? A
You
lot of
really
times,
wanted that house.
Yeah, a lot of times these things end like just in district court. You're not going to go all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
This went to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And they looked at it and they said, look, this statute says any act.
Okay.
That includes closing on this property. So they were able to extend it until the next business day.
Okay.
And so now we're looking at our real estate contracts who have all these deadlines in them.
Yeah.
And when they were looking at doing these updates, because I actually called Grant over at the Real Estate
Yeah.
Commission.
Yeah.
And he said there's a newer attorney that is on the contract forms committee who they were looking at this. And that attorney was like, hey, by the way, there's this statute that exists. We probably want to put this language in or until the next Monday because of this statute that
Yeah.
exists. And that's why it's in there.
Okay.
But it does raise the question about all the other deadlines.
Yeah. So yeah, the first thing I'm thinking of is like, well, TRRs, TRR responses, like if there's an HOA supplement, financing supplements, there are like so many things. And that like, I'm specifically thinking of TRRs, right? You have to submit a TRR within your 7 day or your 10 days. You have to submit it within 24 hours after that. But you also have the option to not submit it.
Right.
Right? That's one of the choices in the contract. You could just not submit one and take the house as is. So what happens then?
You're in this,
We're in this like gray zone, right?
yeah, you're in this flux right here where like if that deadline was Saturday, does that mean do I really
Did
have
I-
until Monday to
Yeah.
submit it? Or, you know, then you've got these parties
There's
that are
two
waiting
there's
around.
two choices there, and they're both. But like me, not an attorney, but like reading that any act, and the statute says that you can't lose your rights if you have to. So like technically, you could wait till Monday,
Yeah.
and then question: is it 12:01 a.m. on Monday? Is it like the same time? Like
Yeah. So this is what I'm one of these people that I love specificity. I love it to
Yeah.
be like clear and on the same page.
So
And that's
do I.
how I felt about it until this whole thing comes up. So no thanks to you, Dan. Like, here we are.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's a perfect question. And I think the reality is it could potentially give to that next business day. And
Yeah.
right now, like a TRR, it would really be any time until midnight, basically. You've got like that whole day since there's
Right.
not a hour. I think you can make an argument that yes, if your TRR submission deadline is Saturday,
Yeah,
it could then extend to Monday,
till Monday. Okay.
right? Which is asinine, frankly, right?
Tend to agree.
I don't think that's a good thing to leave that kind of uncertainty. So then the question is like, what do you do about it? Well, if you're on the opposite side of that, right? Somebody's submitting something late
Yeah.
and they should have submitted it on the weekend and they didn't.
Yes.
Then we're kind of left in that situation of, okay, well, maybe we advise our clients like, look, I think they're late. They should have just respected the deadlines, which is what we should do, right?
Sure.
Just like we all know, like respect the deadlines,
Yeah.
right? If you're early, you're on time. If you're late, you're late, right?
Right.
So respect the deadlines and don't play with this statute, because at that point you're potentially risking litigation.
Yep.
And so like, why get your client into that situation? Like, if you need extra time, try to work out an extension up front. 9 times out of 10 you can do that, right? People are willing to do it. But if you're on that other side and they submitted it late, it's kind of like, do we really want to fight about it, or do we just want to like let it go? And in light of this, the easier situation may be, look, they've got an argument that they could extend it to that next business day, so just let it go, right? Until we have one of two things happens. Either we put in there in the contract that any deadline that ends on a holiday or weekend is extended to the next business day, right? Just make it anything, any date, any deadline, just that way it's clear and everybody's on the same page, then we all know. Or one thing the Supreme Court said in their case is that the parties could have contracted around that statute.
Okay.
But they would have had to have done it specifically, sort of like, we recognize that this statute exists. It says that you have until the next business day, but we're going to choose to ignore that, essentially, and that all the deadlines, regardless of whether it's a holiday or weekend, are on that date.
Okay.
And so they did at least open up the possibility you could contract around it. So I think we need to do one or the other in the contract, is all the deadlines go to the next business day, or we recognize the statute and we're not going to extend any deadlines.
Okay. Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I had always understood, again, not a lawyer, but that like you can't, between two private parties, agree to an amendment that's in violation of the law. But apparently they said in this particular case, you can.
Yeah, that's what's really weird too.
So if we strike it out, then that's okay?
Yeah. So yeah, basically if we pretend that like in our contract, we cite that the statute, what it requires, and that we're not going to agree to that, we're going to agree around that. The Supreme Court case basically said you can do that. And now that like you can't agree to things against the law, generally that principle's for like criminal stuff.
Okay.
Right. So we can't agree to like contract to commit a crime, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So that's usually where you see that kind of a principle play out. But yeah, it's a little bit unusual to have that law on there.
So they left the door open in this case.
To have a contractual
If we have two parties who say, hey, no, we want to ignore that, we want to be really firm about our deadlines, then they could either maybe strike that out or do like some kind of general amendment or something like that. Either one, maybe.
Right. Probably some sort of like special provision, because even if you strike that out, I would still probably want something that references that statute, right?
Okay.
Because that's where the Supreme Court case sort of mentioned they could have specifically done that, right? Because they didn't have that or next business day language in that case.
Right.
It was just, this is the deadline, time is of the essence. They said, yeah, but they still get until that next business day.
Okay.
So that's where having something very specific in there would be good.
Okay.
Now, the other thing, and I talked to Grant about this at OREC, where, because both of us think it's kind of crazy that that would be the result.
Yeah.
You know, and one of the things we talked about was a matter of impossibility. Like, would that really only apply to an act where it's impossible to do it on that day? The statute doesn't say that, but maybe, right, where you can't close on a Sunday, really, right? It's just generally not going to be possible. I mean, I guess you could. You could bring
like a briefcase full of cash.
Exactly, right?
I like to take things to the extreme just for sake of understanding things.
I think that's valid.
I was like, if they put on a Sunday, like if it was even if it wasn't a cash deal, like there probably exist lenders that could do it on a Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, it's theoretically possible. So, you know, I'm not even sure that that gets you there. I mean, maybe that's a better argument if you had to end up going to court over this, of like, look, all they had to do was send an email, not wire transfer money, right? So, you know, maybe, but at the end of the day, that statute is so broad.
Yeah.
And hopefully, at least it's on the Real Estate Commission's radar that this is kind of an issue. I agree with you. I mean, you're not the first person either that I've now heard from, or you're the first person, but I've had some other people that have even called and they're like, hold on, this throws contingency contracts into...
Way under the bus.
Oh, yeah. And for new buyers to come along. And so many people look at houses on weekends, right? And so they may be looking at it on Friday and we're into the week and trying to get it resolved over the weekend, but now they're going to have to wait until that Monday. And well, I got to find something. It's a real problem for contingency contracts.
Absolutely.
And I don't know. I mean, the reality is today too, with houses selling quicker, there probably were really more contingency contracts. Because like I can't list my house and expect to find something else quickly
Right.
because the inventory wasn't there. So, yeah, I don't know how it's going to shake out, but I think the lesson for everybody at this point is just assume that if there was a big fight about a deadline that was on a weekend, the party that should have complied with the deadline arguably had until the next business day.
Okay.
So, depends on how much you want to fight over it
Sure.
and how much your clients want to fight over it, but
If I never show up in court, I'll be very happy.
absolutely, absolutely. So,
Probably true of most people.
exactly. So in most cases, is it worth fighting over the 24, 48 hours?
Right.
Probably
Probably
not.
not.
But at least it's good to know that that's out there.
Yeah.
I appreciate you pointing that out and tagging me on
Absolutely.
there. 'Cause it was a fun learning moment for me.
No,
So,
I was happy to do it and glad to meet you and just kind of talk through everything. And I learned something new as well, for
I
sure.
think we all did. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody knew that existed.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of anybody that knew it. Well, obviously this one attorney on the contract forms committee, but
Yep.
outside of that, who knew? So
Exactly.
we all learned something. So check it out.
Absolutely.